give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it? So what do we do about this master plan that we know exists out there? But we don't really know the intricacies of the master plan, but we are feeling the impact of the master plan. And I know you have some particular insights for that.
Well, and part of the reason why it's just so hard to wrap it's like a piece of soap. The harder you try to get a grip on it, the faster it runs away from you. And we know that master plans morph and they change with the times. You and I, before we got on, were talking about, how slavery just reinvents itself, keeps reinventing itself, whatever time of the world we're in, and especially in US, in this country. And so at the end of last episode, we were talking about a piece of content that I shared with you where a woman was reading what has been attributed to John D. Rockefeller's Masonic Creed. I have done some deeper dives since I looked at that, and am coming up with explanations about why it's not his and why it's a hoax. But we all know that things can be created and explained away in lots of creative ways. So I just want to say out loud that I don't know if this is actually his words, but it brings to light an interesting concept for us to consider about the powers that be and how they create systems that are built in to destroy people over the course of centuries and maintain their power structure. So,
I want to clarify that this is not targeted just towards specific demographics of people. This is actually targeted towards the economic classes of people. So
right.
So we're talking
all people that are not in the same power level as him.
And there's only a few people that want to hold the wealth. Then you are part of the others.
Yeah.
So get yourself included right now.
Yeah. And full disclosure, the reason I shared this with you when I came across it was because I am a descendant of John D. Rockefeller. I'm a descendant of his brother, William. So John D. is my great uncle. And
so just a great is only 2 generations away. Okay.
Yes, only 2. And for those of you who are listening and not watching, I just let out a deep breath because it creates a lot of anxiety for me to even say that out loud on this platform. And you and I were talking about that a little bit before we came on. Yeah. So I'm processing lots of feelings saying that out loud. So
we can take a moment. No, because when you're processing feelings and when you're letting out stuff, it's important to be aware of that and conscious. What needs are around this, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I was taught growing up that we didn't talk about it. We lived. My mother is the direct descendant of William. And so she was raised in a very affluent existence in New York and Connecticut, and she rebelled against all of it. And so her favorite outfit always when I was growing up was a t-shirt and jeans. And she did not want to be, we want to be a Rockefeller. We didn't want for anything, it wasn't that. We lived a nice, but it was a modest middle class existence. It was not, it was privileged, but it was not super flashy as you might attribute to a descendant of that family, because she didn't want anything to do with it. And of course we did live off of the money, so it wasn't that she completely rejected all of it, nor have I.
The expression of it is different.
Yeah, the expression, the expectation that people, the expectation that people would have of being from a family like that is dripping in jewels and, living in massive houses. Now, John D's side is like that. His descendants, most everybody's got Rockefeller in their name. They all have very outward facing, well, not all, I can't paint with that broad of a brush, but many of them have this outward facing existence that is very obvious because the name is something that they wear on their sleeve. William's side is much more subtle. And much more kind of behind the scenes. Now, some would say that that's deceptive. I have never run in any circles with anybody that can claim or has had this lived experience. And so when people have found out about it that don't share that same type of experience, lived experience, I have had people that have, moved away from my friendship and moved away from a life with me because they found that to be that I was somehow being deceptive by not telling them. So
are there any non-white Rockefellers in the bloodline?
Non-white? Great question. Not that I know of. Not that I know of. But that doesn't mean, I don't know.
I don't know everybody.
It's a very large family, so there's no telling, but not that I know of. No.
Okay.
And
that would be interesting. And is this the same side of the family of the manifesto that we dissected early on in our podcast? Same side of the family?
That was on my dad's side. So that was my great grandfather on my dad's side. Was the Grand Dragon of the KKK in North Carolina, Judge Henry Grady. So this is the Rockefeller side is mom's side. So I just got a lot of really, let's just hold space for my really fucked up ancestors.
Real white woman in the U.S.
Yeah. When people ask me what, I'm like, I'm white. I'm white. I'm that white. I'm kind of colonized full on. I mean, I have a lot of Scottish and Irish, so not, colonized.
Which is what we talk about when we say white is a social construct, because you actually are Scottish and Irish, but when
Scottish,
you got
Irish, and then some British colonizer for sure, but yeah.
But when you got to this territory, you became white, like the rest of the people. That no matter if they came from Germany, no matter if they came from Sweden, no matter if they came from some other place, you just became a white person.
Yeah. And John D came from nothing. When he and William were growing up, they had dirt floors in their house, and they had. He became very anal about money because he came from nothing. And he used to make his children keep a ledger of every dime that they earned and every dime that they spent. And, he was a penny pincher and a teetotaler. And so, he didn't come from that experience. But if you've watched The Gilded Age, that time frame was when the Rockefellers were coming into their, and the character, I don't remember his name, the character that is the family that none of the old families really want to give the time of day to. I can't remember their names, but anyway, I would imagine that family is based on the Rockefellers, because that's the way John D, the old money that came from Britain, didn't think that he was worth anything when he was coming up, because he was new money. And that's why, but now it's considered old money. And we're taught as kids and growing up in that, you don't tell anybody, it's all very hush hush. So I was sharing with you.
Master plan. That takes us back to this thing about
let's talk about the master plan. Let's not talk about that. Because I'm not asking for sympathy. Please understand. I'm not, it's not a woe is me kind of conversation. I just wanted to give people context. So.
It's okay. You were born into it. You might have chosen it from the heavens and said, I want to come into this consciousness in this way.
Yes.
And so
it took me a long time to wake up, but I did. And now I'm just trying to do my best with, all of these ill-gotten gains that I have access to, use them for good. Try to, if he's rolling around in his grave, then, more power to it. That's an added bonus. All of my really messed up ancestors, if they're rolling around in their graves because of the things that I do with the money that they created. But,
I wonder about that. So let's talk about,
Yeah. So the content that I shared with you originally was supposed to be this Masonic creed that John Dee penned or said at some point. And I've done a deeper dive in it, and it does Snopes. I feel like Snopes, and maybe I'm wrong about this. So if I am, please offer it in the comments. But I feel like Snopes is pretty good about unpacking things, and they can't make any clear distinction. And there are things in the creed where they talk about using video games for mind control and things, which none of that stuff existed when John Dee was alive. He died in 1937. So it is possible that it's not a true attribution to anything that he said. But having said that, I wouldn't be surprised if he was involved in that kind of thought process of how to maintain his power, how to maintain the power of his particular class, and then how to make sure that anyone that did not fall within that class was easily manipulated, easily subjugated, and easily oppressed. So,
well, I can be a magical Negro at this moment.
yeah,
And
look at that.
I can
Is
offer
my white tears meter? What's my white tears meter doing right now? Is it high?
There's just a lot of anxiety, so I'm just going to pull you back into the present right now.
Okay.
And offer to you that we can talk about this systemically in a way that this is how we do know that people implement plans to be able to maintain their power. So it doesn't matter like who it comes from, who wrote it or whatever. We know that there's blueprints that do exist because we are impacted by them and we exist in them in this moment. And so talking about some of the things that were illuminated in this content is, I think, important.
Yeah, and it actually reminded me a lot of They Clone Tyrone, those conversations that we had about that movie, because the things that were talked about in this supposed creed were things that were depicted in that movie in terms of keeping people weak, keeping people subjugated, making people feel like they don't have access to get out of their lived experience or their certain circumstances to make something better. But even deeper than that, talking about physiologically impacting people's brains and their bodies. And it made me think of the intention with which we see the cultivation of cities and where people in those cities live, where are the factories that are spewing the toxins into the air in the neighborhoods, where is the water depleted from and made toxic, and which neighborhoods drink that water and which ones don't, and the lead and Flint, and how that impacted the citizens of Flint, Michigan for so many years unabated. And so, yeah, those are the kinds of things that I was thinking about when I was listening to the content, and then I went and read some of the words. So,
and some of what stuck out for me, not so much the tactics, but like the overall goal to separate humans from themselves and from the actual power of their autonomy. So that's what I was hearing. I'm like it kind of like delineates out the tactics of doing that. So to your point, the Rockefellers might not have known about video games, but the use of video games for mind control, where people are on their technology. Like I'm a culprit of this myself. Like TikTok has gotten me fully addicted. I want to scroll, I want to flick, I want to hear and see what people are talking about, see how people are living their lives, look at the dances, look at the clothes, buy the products, all of the things that is like completely infiltrating my mind and my mind space, separating me from myself. The way that technology is being used now with AI, where if you have access to the AI and you know how to start utilizing the technology in that way, you would go to that before you start having your own thoughts, because you're like, well, let me just put in a prompt and see what this thing says first.
Yeah.
And it'll shorten the time.
It's convenient.
The
making things convenient is
the pharmaceutical field is the content was talking about, and allowing people to get sicker. So like, you're using this technology, you're not using your mind, you're not moving your body. So now your body biologically is getting sicker. And then we're going to keep on giving you medication that you're going to continue to need to get sicker. So all of the things that we exist in today, that we have an understanding that our food is not the healthiest food anymore. We don't know how it's grown and don't know how it's produced. We know that it's GMO, but we're still intaking it. All of these things that we know that we're existing in, what this Masonic creed was talking about is the impact of where we are existing today. And not only that, also talking about the subjugation of the entire world, not even the communities that you are most associated with, but control over the world, like as we're seeing with these wars that are happening right now. Iran, Ukraine, it's not really wars per se with bombs and things like that on the continent of Africa, competition with the continent of Asia. So like we're seeing all of this tension to maintain this master plan of subjugation, how you were saying, oppression, control, and power over people.
Yeah. And access to resources. I mean, that's what the continent of Africa has been, suffering under since white people landed there. I mean, since whiteness showed up and decided, look at this incredibly rich environment. Let's figure out how to extract all of the resources and not allow. And I mean, that's where Iran,
for everywhere.
As I'm learning, that's where Iran happened back in the 70s, where Iran said, the leadership of Iran said, we want the benefits of the oil that is under our earth to be to the benefit of the Iranian people. And the US said, oh, hell no. And so we staged a coup and we put a leader in there that would allow, BP did specifically. So if you're still buying gas from BP, don't. But, they did that intentionally. And so, I'm not suggesting that the Iranian regime that is in place right now is a good one. The Iranian people, I'm trying to listen to as many Iranian voices as possible to learn what I can about what they're going through. And it's very complicated, right? And I know we heard that about Israel, but it's complex. I guess maybe that's a better word to use. It is very complex, that there are people, especially in the Iranian diaspora, who they want regime change, and it's also, does the US and Israel need to be the ones doing it? No, so, but the US and Israel are the leaders of the master plan, right? They're the masters of that plan. And so they are going to continue to morph it and do what they need to do to continue the extraction and the expansion of, that we're now hearing lots of talk about Greater Israel. What does Greater Israel look like? Well, that's why they're bombing Lebanon, and that's why they're bombing, because they're trying to expand Israel to cover over all these other countries. So this is just an expansion of empire, which this country was bred out of, which, colonization since the beginning of time that's always been its intention. And I think it's important for all of us, and that's why you and I are talking about it. Why we give, or I'll speak for myself, why I give a fuck about it, is that it is, everything old is new again. This is all the exact same playbook that we have been watching, learning about, and a part of for centuries. And this country, the U.S., is about to celebrate its 250th anniversary, and so, when are we going to finally, as the people, not the government, not the people that are running the master plan, but the people that are living it and living within it, when are we going to finally say enough is enough? And when are USians finally going to get angry enough and show up in, where was it? Morocco, I think maybe there was a massive protest about what was happening in Iran. And it was seemingly every human from every household was in the streets, and the U.S. is just not, because we're still so sleepy and stupefied and still so.
We're under the master plan is what I would offer, right? And
focused on our comfort.
Focusing on our comfort, and if we're thinking about it, the master plan being about separating people from themselves and
Yeah.
stripping them of their power.
Yeah.
The US,
That has
Israel,
worked here.
Russia, you
Yeah.
know, the folks who are in power and leadership are really good about implementing this plan and executing this plan to a
Mhm.
point where we have taking it into our DNA. So we exist, play a part of the plan as much as those who are executing the plan.
Yes,
Because
we are
we are
perpetuating
sitting,
it.
yeah, because we are sitting in allowing ourselves to be separated from ourselves, from our communities, from our tribes, from our humanity, for our
Yeah.
care and our consideration. We're becoming more individualistic. We're thinking about how do we take care of ourselves instead of how do we take care of others. And I know that I orient to the collective, so I also want to like check in with myself about that. But humanity can't exist by itself. I do know that. I can't exist by myself. Humanity
Right.
doesn't exist by ourselves. We need the ecosystem of the trees, the water, the other people, the animals. We need the ecosystem, and that
We
being
do.
an absolute truth. Separating ourselves from the reality of that is how we allow these structures in this master plan to continue
Mhm.
to expand, to
Yeah.
have greater Israel, a greater amount of destruction, a greater amount of harm, and a greater amount of people in need, and a gap between those who have and those who haven't. And that's the reality of what we're sitting in today.
Right, right. And it becomes incumbent upon us, and we are living in an extraordinary time
Mhm.
because as I said before, everything old is new again. This is not new in what's happening in terms of the expansion of empire, but what's new about it, or what's maybe unusual to the time, is the access to the amount of information that we have, to the amount of video evidence of what's happening that we can see with our own eyes. Now that's getting compromised with AI. I was watching something. I don't watch a whole lot on regular television anymore that has commercials, but I was watching something that had commercials the other day, and almost every other commercial was an AI commercial. Was in some way,
Mhm.
shape, or form was a country, like a company that was
Mhm.
pushing some sort of AI technology, and I was like, oh my gosh, almost every other, because they want to make it all about convenience, convenience, convenience. You can learn anything you want to know while they're destroying communities with these AI data centers. And so, and making us stupid, it's like we can't go pick up a book anymore and figure out about something. We want to just, put it into our phones and miraculously.
Mhm.
So I think that's what you meant, or at least that's what I resonated with when you were talking about how we're all perpetuating this. We are allowing ourselves to be put asleep in a
We're
lot of
part of it.
ways.
Mhm.
And we've had this conversation before where we compare it to what happened after the Civil War, and how the United Daughters of the Confederacy took the story of the Lost Cause, which was the abridged version, the changed version of the Civil War, its causes, its reasons, and what historically happened. Took that story, created the Lost Cause, which was the narrative they wanted to push, and made sure it got into the textbooks. So we've seen this happen before, but at the back when that happened, we didn't have access to anything else. All we had were the textbooks, and all we had was the narrative storytelling. And so once that narrative got set, we were screwed in terms of being able to know that that wasn't real. Now that's not the case. But the more the master plan, I think the expansion of the master plan based on today's issue, or today's circumstances and lived experience of people that live in the world today, that's where AI comes in. That is the equivalent of the Lost Cause being implemented into the textbooks by
Well,
the
they've shifted the mechanism
BBC.
of mind control, right? So
Yeah,
back
yeah,
in, I mean, we still have, educational institutions that are pushing
right.
narratives if they want
Or
slavery
or
to
erasing the
enforce
truth
slavery.
about what happened.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
to enforce slavery, to continue with executing
Hmm.
the master plan, but they've
Yep.
shifted the mechanisms, and the mechanisms now you're able to use technology. The one thing that, coming from a community, and you and I keep on having this conversation about, the train has left the station for the evolution of technology. And
Mm.
those with less access and resource don't have the same privilege of choosing whether or not they can participate in it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, if you don't have the knowledge, if you don't have the access, if you don't have the resource, then you're never even going to be able to get closer. And none of us are the place where the folks who don't talk about their wealth. None of us are at that place. But
Heard.
but to be able to access some type of being able to survive, or even try to think about thriving, you do have to participate in what society and community is giving you as resource.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah,
real.
I get it. I mean, it's just like, yeah, privilege always makes things easier, which is part of the reason why the master plan works so hard to keep the privilege in the hands of the few and not in the greater masses, because, you know, it makes them more vulnerable. I mean, when Trump said out loud on mic, you know, I love uneducated people, he that was in, you know, he meant it because an uneducated electorate is an easily manipulated electorate. And so all of that is interwoven for sure. And yeah, I'm sure you're right that the train has left the station.
It's
And
there.
I
If you
guess,
watch commercials of AI, and
yeah,
every single thing that we are being engaged with right now is asking us to, in some way, you know, participate with AI.
yes, and there are times where we can't get away from that. I guess I'm imploring those that might be listening or watching this that do have the ability to, it's kind of like whiteness. It's kind of like understanding my privilege and realizing that in every circumstance, whatever my privilege is, I need to use it to the greatest good that I can. The same can be said for folks that understand the trappings and the dangers of AI. And if you have the ability to circumvent it and figure out another way, you know, if it just means that you don't pick up your phone and speak into Siri and try to find out a question to an answer, instead you know, go and use the resources that you have to go and find that answer. Those kinds of intentional choices are important for those of us who have more access and more privilege. And so I think the thing that pushback's not the right term, but I think where I bristle at the train's left the station is that it gives people with privilege license to just say, well, you know, I can't, there's nothing I can do. And so I guess I want to caveat that to say there is still something we can do if we belong to, or if we have a certain level of privilege that allows us access to other means to try to find out, to intentionally don't use it everywhere that you cannot use it. So I suppose that's just the caveat they always like to say, because yes, there are many, many, many communities of people that don't have access to
Don't know how to use it.
Yeah.
And we're not even talking about ethnicity. If you think about age,
No.
you know what I mean? If you're thinking about being in the urban versus the rural communities, we're thinking about that is going to also be an indicator of how the wealth gap continues to grow wider, in addition to those with resources and those who don't have resources. And it's actually helping to propagate the master plan. It's helping to keep people separated from themselves and separated from all of the things that they need in a way to be able to survive and thrive, and for us to elevate as a society. But I also think that the master plan is inviting and asking, or those are not the right words, is being intentional about cutting down the human population. We're seeing it happening. We're seeing it happening with genocide, with actual genocide. Yes. We're seeing it happening with the war that is going on. We're seeing it happening, to your point earlier, with the raping of resources from other lands to benefit the few, at harm to a larger demographic of human beings. And so the master plan is winning right now. And I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it because we haven't developed the mechanisms to understand how to break down this master plan, whether or not it was coming from a Masonic creed or whether or not it was identified from a group of people who made a decision And maybe even in this conversation, that is the control over our minds to think that we don't have power or don't have the ability to do anything to counteract or shift this plan that's existing.
I think I said it in a previous episode where I said, if I feel uncomfortable about something, I'm doing something new and it makes me feel a little uncomfortable, it means I'm doing the right thing, because
Yes.
comfort is a built-in space for my existence and my lived experience. And so if I'm feeling uncomfortable, that probably means I'm doing something right. It just made me think of that when you were saying that, because I think all of us, if we find ourselves convincing ourselves that we can't do something because we don't feel powerful, we don't feel like we have power, but if each of us were able to take the moment that we feel that, the moment that we acknowledge that, say that's what they want, that's what they want, how can I turn it around? We might be able to break those neurons and those pathways that are so highly developed in our brain. It's like you were saying that you felt so, I'm using the word addicted. You didn't say that, I don't think, to TikTok. The choice to break that is to turn it off, right? Or to not engage with it. And so does that cause anxiety in you?
Yes. Cortisol levels going.
Oh no. Warning. Yeah. And, so I guess, I don't know why I said all that. I guess maybe it was just if there's a solution, I don't know that we have a solution, but it resonates with me that a solution that each of us can do, no matter our status, no matter our standing, no matter where we fall in any of the tiers of class and privilege and space in the US and around the world, is when we're feeling powerless, to thinking in terms of that's what they want. That's what they want. And if that's what the global they, that is the controllers of the master plan, if that's what they want us to feel, how do we find a way to break that?
To tap into our power. That is the thing.
Yeah.
Right? In social activism, that it is. How do we tap into your personal power, with your personal story narrative, with your collective story narrative, and with, you know what I mean, with community, like tapping into our personal power and remembering how to wield that in the same way that those with the master plan are wielding their power.
And it could be personal power. I mean, it kind of reminds me of, because I'm in recovery, and it kind of reminds me of that like when you first get sober, the first thing they teach you is 1 day at a time. And then sometimes it's 1 hour at a time, and sometimes it's 1 minute at a time. And sometimes, because that's the only time frame that you can hold that sobriety, for just that one moment. And then you go to the next, and then you go to the next. That's when you were talking about reclaiming your power. I want to say out loud that I understand that I'm talking about this from an immense place of privilege. And so my power space is going to feel and look very different than other people's. But we all have that one moment that we're in, each of us, no matter what our circumstance is. And I know it's hard. It's really hard sometimes to be in that moment and see any level of power when there's such despair. But like you said, tapping into who we are, tapping into our breath, even, we all have control over our breath. And so if we can tap into that and sustain that for a moment, for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes, that can grow. And then that can move into other things, and we can start to realize, oh, I might have power over this. And I have power over whether or not maybe I don't have power over whether or not I eat today, but I have power over what, so trying to find those moments. And the more power we take back, the more we are breaking the cycle that the master plan has woven for all of us. And that's how we change it.
And power is intoxicating. So I'm going to make the invitation of acknowledging what you have control over, because power, you see what you have control over. And the thing that we have control over is ourself and being present in this moment.
Yes.
So the invitation is to be present and to be in control of what you have control over, which is yourself.
Thank you for that reminder. You are so right.
Until
Thank you
next,
for holding space today. I appreciate you.
we continue to do so. Blessings.
Why do I give a fuck? Why
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
do I give a
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.